Now, TDs claimed more than €567,000 in expenses for December, the very first month of the new Dáil term, when the House sat on just one occasion. Newstalk's political correspondent Seán Defoe was with me on the line today. Seán, how do the TDs' expenses work, first of all?
Yeah, well, it's not bad when you put it like that, is it? To be able to claim thousands of euro a month when there was only one actual sitting day, and a sitting day where the only business was the election of Count Corla, with the negotiations, if you like, on the government formation talk still ongoing through it. So this allowances that they get, they're done monthly, and I suppose there's a lot of different allowances that they can get, some for the likes of phones and some for office space, etc. But the ones that we're talking about in these figures are their parliamentary standard allowance, is what it calls. There's two parts to that. One is an expense to cover the cost of their work as a TD, their work as a public rep. So that could be renting an office, it could be printing out leaflets, it could be for their website, different things like that. Now, that's a vouched expense and it has an annual limit. So they need to submit their receipts in order to get their payment, but typically it is paid on a monthly basis in line with the rest of it, so it's wrapped up in these figures. The other part of it is travel and accommodation costs, and this is weighted depending on how far away from Leinster House that they actually live. So when you're talking about, for example, TDs from Dublin, they can get up to €9,000 a year for travel and accommodation, because obviously they're not going to be doing a huge amount of it. And on the far end, on band 12 of the 12 bands, which currently includes only one TD, Michael Collins, who lives in rural West Cork, that goes up to €34,000 a year. So that is for your, travelling up a couple of times a week or whatever it is to Dublin.
It's your travelling. It's travelling. You're getting the money back for getting yourself to work.
To work and travel within the constituency for TDs is covered as well. So if you live in Donegal, say, and you need to travel to Fanad from Donegal town or wherever it is as part of your actual work of being a TD, to meet people on the ground, whatever it is, for TDs, that's covered as well under this. And the accommodation, and this is quite a big one for a lot of TDs, obviously, because they would spend on a Dáil working week at least 2 nights in Dublin. If they're the party leaders or front benchers, it's often quite a bit more. So someone like Pierce Doherty would have quite high accommodation bills from hotel rooms, for example, throughout this. So this is what it covers, the kind of travel, the accommodation, and then the other incidental expenses that are borne by being a TD.
And none of that is paid out of the €113,000 salary that they receive annually?
No, that's entirely separate, and that is just their salary. So this is on top of everything, and that's why they were able to get this money while there was only one sitting day in the month, because it is paid monthly. It doesn't matter, it's not vouched. You don't have to submit your receipts to say, well, yes, I actually did have 5 trips from Kerry to Dublin in that particular week or whatever it is.
Sorry, just to be clear, if I'm a TD, I can, and my constituency is in Donegal, I can say I travelled to Dublin for work and stayed in a hotel, and presumably, Seán, I have to produce a receipt for this.
No, you don't have to produce receipts for it. What you do have to do is log in at least 120 days physically in the Dáil. So that's the only thing.
Okay, so there'll be a roll call, basically.
Pretty well, yeah. It's like logging in when you go into work, like clocking in your time card used to be. You have to do that.
But I could stay with a friend or relative and
you could claim my night's accommodation. With a friend. Some of them have property in Dublin, have an apartment that's near particularly members of government. Now, if you are a minister, at least up until this particular government, you didn't get this allowance. You didn't get your accommodation covered, and we know that was something that the rural and regional independents negotiated into this programme for government, that they for the first time would get it. And it was a big bugbear for junior ministers, because they might go from being a lowly backbencher to being a junior minister, coming with a 50 grand pay increase, and yet still be out money, because they would suddenly lose all of the expenses that they were able to claim for hotels. But that's changed in this government.
Sorry, so the junior ministers don't get that?
They do get it now.
They do.
They
Apologies.
Used to get it.
Okay,
yeah.
They do now. So can you just take us through the figures, Seán, on this? So aside from the salary, we get the allowance for our accommodation per night if we're staying in paid for hotel accommodation. We get an allowance to physically get ourselves to Leinster House.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get an allowance for running our office in our constituency.
That's it. So you get, there's also, if you want to wrap in the other expenses that they get, so the public representative allowance includes, like I said, office rental, leaflet printing, web hosting, stuff like that. There's the TAA allowance, which allows you your travel and your accommodation. They get up to 8 grand for the establishment of a constituency office. So an awful lot of the new TDs are availing of that at the moment. They get €750 every 18 months to buy a phone, to upgrade their phone.
How much?
But 750 every year and a half to put towards a new phone. They get €400
Why
for
would you
graphic
need a new
design
phone
services.
every year and a half?
Well, I suppose the thinking on it being that you're going to be updating with the latest technology. Look, let's be honest, most of them don't use it. Like
Right,
Danny Healy
okay.
Ray is still using a phone, is probably older than
That's
I am.
very true.
That here in the Dáil. So a lot of them don't. But when they are upgrading their phone, and I suppose for some of them, for the likes of the ministers, there is a point where it becomes a security concern that you probably need a newer phone that can't be hacked into. But then again, do you need €750 every 18 months when you're on a six-figure salary? I don't know. And then, of course, there's the new expenses that came in the last few years, up to €25,000 for security measures at their home or office, provided they've had work done. That is obviously a vouched expense, as is the phone and as is the establishment of committee office. They're ones that you have to put your receipts in for.
Yeah, so the €25,000 vouched expense. So that's if you want to put in CCTV or Ring doorbell or whatever, electric gates or
electric gates, put in a shutter on the constituency office, whatever it is. They have to have a security assessment carried out before they can get that, and then have to do the work and claim it back, essentially. And that's because of the rise in not only attacks on constituency offices, but also a number of cases where people have had people turn up at their homes or threatened to turn up at their homes. You had the Sinn Féin TD who had his car burnt out in Sligo Leitrim a couple of years ago. So that's one that's a relatively new one.
Yeah. Also, as well, I note even too. I think Holly Cairns is mentioned, isn't she? The Social Democrat leader in the list of claimants today, because she's on obviously maternity leave at the moment.
This drew quite a lot of eyebrows because she is in one of the highest brackets as well. So like I said, there's 12 brackets. She's in bracket 11 because she does live in rural West Cork. And as you mentioned, on maternity leave throughout December, and yet got her allowance of €4,478. Now, the two sides of this. One is, look, should you be getting it if you're not actually going to the Dáil or doing anything? Probably not. But on the other hand, so backwards is the Dáil's rules for maternity leave. And when I say so backwards, they don't have any. There is no legislation to allow maternity leave for TDs at the minute, that there's actually no mechanism to take this away from her. Now, what I imagine you could see, because they can gift this back or they cannot claim this allowance, that is entirely within the gift of these politicians. So we may well see Holly Cairns give some of that money back, because obviously she wasn't travelling to Dublin and availing of accommodation through the month of December.
Yeah, it's the travel and accommodation expenses. I can tell you that a lot of our texters are a little bit animated about today. I suppose the disparity is somewhere between 9 and 34 grand, Sean.
Yeah, depending on where you live. And I mean, some of that's fair. You know, if you're in Dublin, you probably don't need it. You're going home to your constituency. I mean, there's a number of TDs. I think Ona Bryn is one of them, Jim O'Callaghan another, who don't, Keane O'Callaghan too, don't claim any of these because they get the bike into work or whatever. They don't rack up any expenses. Or they
probably do like everybody else in the world listening to us today. They pay for their accommodation and travel out of their salary.
Yeah, that too. But like, there's an element of it being fair too, right? Because if we were in our job, if you were to go on an OB tomorrow and you had to stay overnight, you'd expect the company to cover it because you're there on work. So there is an argument to be made that if you have to,
but day to day, you're going to work isn't paid for. You don't get an expense for making your way into the Dáil today to cover what's happening.
No, you don't. But if you are a TD who lives in Donegal and you're going to have to spend half of your week up in Dublin and staying there, there's an entitlement to an expense for travel and that. Now, there is an argument to say this is too much of an expense to be giving them £4,000 a month. Does it really rack up to that? But if you take whatever, let's say you're up for 2 days a week, €250 a night probably for a Dublin hotel if you can get it at that. So you're talking about an expense of €500 a week. That's £2,000 before you factor in your travel and your mileage, you know, which is probably going to be another grand. So when you take the far-reaching TDs, it suddenly does start to add up the amount of travel and accommodation they do actually pay for.
A listener tells me the HSE recently received a memo to all staff demanding a reduction in travel expenses. This has resulted in a reduction in essential training courses for nurses. Another texter wondering, how can we petition to make sure ministers produce receipts for their expenses? I suppose it's because some are vouched and unvouched, Sean.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's a pretty fair ask, isn't it? That you only are able to claim back for what you actually use. That's your
Yeah.
actual mileage, and you're putting the hotel room. It's obviously easier from an admin point of view on the Oireachtas that they don't have to. They just pay it out.
Yeah,
But
it'd be a lot
obviously,
easier on
not everyone is doing it.
it'd be a lot easier on the public coffers though, if there maybe was a receipt to show that whoever says they stayed in a hotel did actually stay and pay for said hotel on the night. Seán Defoe, political correspondent. Seán, thanks a million for joining us here on Lunchtime Live. That'll just give you a little snippet into some of the expenses claimed by TDs. As we said, €567,000 for the month of December.